Hello and welcome to Bulimia Sucks. I'm your host, Kate Hudson-Hall, and thank you so much for listening. Now, this is a platform for people to share relatable and uplifting, but also inspiring conversations based on eating disorder. And then episodes include talking with people who are struggling with an eating disorder, sharing their personal stories and their difficult journeys and their steps taken into their recovery. And then also to people who have overcome an eating disorder. And then also to people who work with their clients, who are professionals, and they work with their clients who have an eating disorder. So there's a lovely variety of different people. So it's very exciting. Now, my book, Bulimia Sucks, the audiobook, is live on Amazon. So if you are interested and would be like a free copy of that, if you email me at katehudsonhall@gmail.com, I can send you the code so you can download it for free and you can watch it on Amazon or iTunes or wherever, Audible. So it's on all three, so which are the most common. So if you're interested, let me know. Now, I have also finished my book about helping people with anxiety. So I'm very excited about this. And I've decided on the name. It's going to be called Anxiety Hacks. And the subtitle is Techniques, Tools and Tips to Calmness. So I'm just waiting for it to come back from the editor, and I have somebody making the book cover for me. So it's all beginning to unravel. So it's very exciting, and then it'll be off to the formatters because I really can't do the formatting myself. Oh my gosh. No. So that is all very exciting, but I'll keep you updated about that. So our guest today, who has been on the show before. So I am so pleased to welcome back Debbie Saroufim.
Yes, that is me. I'm so excited to be back. Thank you so much, Kate, for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. So Debbie is a body relationship community group coach, struggling for years with her own eating disorder. She now helps women make peace with their bodies, food and exercise, and build up their immunity to diet culture. Mm-hmm. And Debbie does both one-to-one counseling, but she also offers a private membership where you'll be able to connect with other women of all shapes and sizes and all who have been impacted by this dreadful diet culture that we live in. Now, as I said, Debbie has joined us before. Now, she joined us in episode 96. So where she shared her journey with her own eating disorder. So if you would be interested and want to find out more about Debbie and her journey, check out episode 96. So Debbie's here today for her to educate parents on how to speak and guide their children forward with a more of a positive outlook on eating healthily and also on body image.
So that's a tall order, Kate. that's a very tall order.
Just a short space of time.
For a very short podcast, yes.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. But it's
you can just talk really quickly.
Of course. No, it's really important. You know, I'm a mom. And even before becoming a mom, before I got to this place with my relationship with my body, where I sort of made peace with it, which I always want to dispel the myth. Making peace with your body doesn't mean that you like everything you see every time you look in the mirror. And
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. And that's actually, let's highlight that one, because that one we're going to come back to for the parents, right? Because kids are going to complain that they don't like things about themselves. And I know the way that I was raised was to say, you know what, no, you're great. And here's why. And it sort of creates this duality of like, oh, well, the things that I think are bad, you're denying them. So if these things are bad, if this stuff that I don't like about myself is true, then maybe I am bad. And what we want to teach, to allow, is a space to not like everything about yourself, even while you love yourself. You know, again, I always say, a relationship with your body is like that with a partner. And you don't have to like everything about your partner for your partner to be a good partner. My husband and I get on each other's nerves. Sometimes he's the perfect person and sometimes he's the last person that I want to see. And either way, I'm in a relationship with him that I want to work on. And so we want to kind of give our kids the space to love themselves, even if they don't like everything about themselves. Because I don't know that I think that's where oftentimes the message gets sort of convoluted is, well, I want to teach my kid to like themselves, of course, but we want to also teach them that on the days that they don't like themselves, because we're all going to have those days, that they're still okay, that not liking yourself doesn't mean you're not likable, right? And so creating the space for that. My kids are 5 and 7. We live in a house that's very, all bodies are good bodies, fat acceptance, no foods are bad foods. But my kids have come home from school with messages from friends that certain foods are bad for your body because they'll make you fat or, all of this stuff. And if they didn't have a mom who was literally preaching like out every pore of her body that stuff is wrong, I don't know how those messages would land. And so I think we have to remember that we want to be able to support, even if we can give our kids every perfect message, right? Even if everything that comes out of us is spot on, diet culture is still everywhere. So they're going to get some of these negative messages. And how do we best support our kids when they get these negative messages so that they, again, don't have to feel like feeling bad about themselves means that they are bad?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that at least they've got some another point of view rather than just the billboards and the confusion of the diet culture being thrown at them.
Yeah, it's everywhere. It's super obvious in certain things like the billboards and all that stuff, but it's covert in other ways, right? It's that the villain is always a fat character and the lead is always, svelte, and it's in there. So it's everywhere. Even if you're not noticing it, you're still being impacted by it. So how do we help our kids build up some immunity to some of this toxic messaging? And I think that the first place that I want to start, because there are some things that I think parents can do. And this, I always say this is the easiest one, but I also realize that it's the hardest one for a lot of parents. We want to use the word fat freely. Fat has become a bad word. We whisper it. Oh, she's fat. No, it's a description. It is a completely appropriate way of describing someone. She has blonde hair. She has blue eyes. Her body is fat. And it's not until we make it a bad word that it's a bad word. But if you can use fat without prejudice and without the negativity that culturally we've associated with it, then on the days that your kid is thinking they are fat or told that they are fat, it doesn't have to be the end of the world, because fat is only bad because we as a culture have made it bad. Because the truth is that bodies come in different shapes and sizes. Some are fat, some are thin. Fat doesn't mean unhealthy. Thin doesn't mean healthy. I always, when I was at my thinnest, I was the least healthy I've ever been, right? If I had stuck it out at that size, I probably wouldn't be here today. So, culturally we have this idea that fat is bad, but that's a big myth. And so how we can help sort of break down that mythology is by using the word fat without whispering it, without saying it with like a, shh, don't say anything. I don't mean that. No, people can be fat. Fat doesn't have to be a bad thing. But I understand how uncomfortable that makes so many people, because that fat has very much been villainized by our culture.
Yes.
So practice, start saying the word fat. Just it gets easier. And that's sort of the first way to let your kids know that that on the days that they think they're fat, or if they are fat, that they're still okay, right? Because it starts with the messaging at home. So they're
not going to feel so bad about themselves.
Right. Because we've sort of created this world in which the worst thing you can be is fat. It's such a bad word. We don't even say it. We say stuff like big boned or full figured or fluffy. I've heard fluffy. No, like fat's not a bad thing. Right. And so
yeah, I think
some of us are going to be fat. In fact, statistically, quite a few of us are going to be fat. So let's not make it a bad word. And that's sort of that's why I say this is the easiest one, because I personally think that the next thing that we can do as parents is much, much harder. And that is recognizing where we take on and own some of this diet culture thinking. And so I don't want to there's no shame in this, but if you are dieting and you have children, you are subscribing to the diet culture belief that smaller is better.
Yes.
And so it's such a humbling experience, because even when I first had my kid, I first had my kids and I tried to lose the baby weight, and it's a normal thing to do. And again, pretty much everybody, I have yet to meet a person who hasn't gone on a diet. But when we say, I don't want my kids to feel the way that I feel, we have to remember that, again, bodies can come in different shapes and sizes. Yeah. When we diet to change the size of our body, it buys into the mythology that there is you can't see the air quotes, but a correct way to have a body. And how can we tell our kids that their body is fine if it doesn't look a certain way, if we can't take that on ourselves? So that's a hard one to do. But this is where I've been working with some of my women, because that's again, I mean, this is already a tall order, right? To try and raise kids with a healthy body image in a very short podcast. But I think because even as a coach who teaches how to build up your immunity to diet culture, I still sort of stumble upon places where diet culture lives in me. It's been in there for so long.
Well, but we've been brought up with it,
yes.
From our parents, way our parents have talked to us, and we know, when we have children, that those certain words just pop out of our mouths, and we, without us even thinking.
We don't even think about it. And so what I like to do when that happens, and I don't like doing it, let's put it that way. I don't like doing it because I never like admitting that I'm wrong, but I'll do it anyway, is when I have a moment where I say something that sort of supports that there's a correct way to have a body, I have to correct myself. And I have to say, you know what? When mommy was growing up, we learned that there was a certain way bodies were supposed to look in order to be healthy. And now we know so much more than that. And I'm so grateful that I know enough to tell you that there's no one way to have a body. Bodies can come in all different sizes, but sometimes mommy still catches herself thinking the old way. And so I'm sorry. And I'll let you know, anytime I catch myself doing that, I'll try and remember, that's not actually the truth, right? We know more information than that. But it's humbling because you kind of have to be prepared to tell your kids you don't know everything and aren't perfect all the time, which they're very quick to jump on and suppose. So they're like, I knew you weren't perfect and all of those things. But I think, it is tough because the messaging is so ingrained. Some of these thoughts I have, I don't even know if they're my thoughts anymore or if they've just sort of been planted in there, if that makes any sense. And so how do we teach kids? Essentially what we want to learn as parents is, how do we not pass on our bias to our children, right? Because that's what diet culture has taught us. Diet culture has taught us to be biased, that thin bodies are good and fat bodies are bad. And so one way that we cannot pass on our bias, like I said, is to say fat. Say fat as if it's not a bad word, right? Because if you're whispering it, bad word. But another way that we can do that is to stop dieting, and not everybody is ready to do that. And so can you diet and raise your kids to have a healthy body image? That's that's a lot, but I think if we're honest about what it is, I'm not encouraging anyone to diet with their kids, but if you're not ready to give up your diet, but you're looking to support your kid in a healthy body image, I think there needs to be a conversation around, this is something mommy does to feel safe. And the truth is that mommy doesn't need to do this. And mommy wants to raise you so that you know you don't have to do this. And this is something mommy is working on. And I'm so glad I have the information to give to you, because mommy doing this is kind of silly. We know that bodies come in all different sizes. We know that all different size bodies are healthy and beautiful, and mommy's not comfortable listening to her body yet. We're learning to listen to our bodies. You get to learn to listen to your body from a really young age, but mommy wasn't taught to do that. So mommy still gets caught dieting sometimes, and there has to be an honest conversation around what it is.
Yes.
I think.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, and you probably are going to bring this up, but how a parent, not only is if the parent is on a diet, but also how they talk about their own body. And
yes.
Oh my gosh, my jeans feel so much tighter. Oh gosh, and then go down that whole route in front of the child, and the child just unconsciously pick up all of these negative connotations that are all connected to their future life around food.
Yeah. And I mean, all of these things are normal, natural things. In fact, when we think about it in terms of that, your kids are growing out of their jeans all the time because they're kids, right? They're not afraid of it yet. They haven't been taught to be afraid of it yet. Yes. So again, if you catch yourself, because you will catch yourself, because I catch myself saying stuff like, oh, my jeans are tight. Again, you can throw in a simple correction of, man, bodies change. I'm so quick to make that a bad thing, but bodies change all the time. Look at your body's changing, and I think it's fantastic. And again, just sort of identifying the mythology within it, because I think it's normal to feel those ways. And again, we want to give our kids the space that one day, right now they're not, right now my kids are 5 and 7. So they get very excited when they grow out of their jeans, because it means they're getting taller and all of those sorts of things. But there is a possibility that despite all that I teach, one day my kids, in their adult bodies will grow out of their jeans and be sad about it. And again, I want them to know, even if you're kind of bummed, it doesn't mean you have to do anything to change it, right? Even, I'm starting to get a few gray hairs. I have the choice. There's nothing wrong with dyeing your hair, but I have the choice of letting it go natural. It's a choice, right? I'm not forced to dye my hair because there's nothing wrong with gray hair. Right. Or, I'm aging by the second. My face doesn't look like it did in my 20s. I can miss my 20. Oh, thank you. I can miss my 20-year-old face, and missing my 20-year-old face and having grown out of my 20-year-old face doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with my 42-year-old face, right? So you want to give them the space to have sadness around some of this stuff, even if it's like, oh man, those were my favorite jeans. I don't want to go jean shopping again. Okay, well, I can be sad about it, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? We want to sort of unlink the bad connotation that some of these things have. You're still allowed to feel bad about them, but feeling bad doesn't mean that they are bad. And we want to give our kids the space to have the ability to feel bad without taking it on as they are bad.
Yeah. One thing that I remember, and I think this is really important to talk about, I remember a very common phrase that was said to me from my mother, and then also at school. We were always forced to eat everything on our plate. Think of all those poor, starving African children.
Oh, I got that one too.
Oh my gosh, that's probably a whole nother area to talk about.
I know.
It's really important that children, if they don't eat everything on their plate, that means that they are actually tuning into that feeling of being, most of the time, into that feeling of being moderately full and stopping eating.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting. And as someone who has had to relearn how to trust my hunger levels, When my kids were babies, I was breastfeeding, and trusting them on their hunger levels was hard. But, there were so many times when I was like, she should be eating more. Why isn't she eating more? I didn't matter how many times I put my boob in her mouth. She was done. And I think kids know when they're done. Here's what's hard for us is because we have very quickly been taught from a very young age not to trust your hunger levels. So when we see our kids eating less than we think they should or more than we think they should, we oftentimes feel the need to comment. We need to trust that they are better at this right now than we are. And I think the other thing where it gets hard is diet culture has taught us that there are good foods and bad foods. But the truth is that food is just food. There's definitely more nutritiously dense food and less nutritiously dense food, but nutrition is not the only reason to eat. Even babies know that, right? Like they'll nurse strictly for comfort sometimes, and that's okay. Nobody's going to tell a baby not to nurse for comfort. That's a perfectly wonderful reason to nurse. And it works, right? They find comfort in it, and it may or may not affect how hungry they are later. And that's okay. So I think, again, we have to sort of recognize the bias that we have when we see our kids eating. And we say something like, please just eat the healthy stuff on your plate, or please just eat the meat, or please just eat the vegetables, recognizing that, they're better at this than we are. So
they haven't had the difficult absorption of the diet culture.
Right. And so it's very hard as a parent, and I am still uncomfortable doing this, but I try and do it anyway. But it's very uncomfortable as a parent to trust that my kids know what to eat, when to eat it, especially when I'm like, really? Because all they're eating right now is the cookies that I gave them. And like, they're not having any of that. But you know what? Bodies need different things at different times. And then we have to remember that nutrition is fluid, right? Like you are not the sum total of your last meal. So if your last meal wasn't the most nutritiously dense thing you ever had, that's fine, because you had something earlier and you're going to have something later. And again, if your body needs something, it's going to ask for something. I mean, I always think of it as, sometimes the last thing, like you get this incredible dish of food and there's a side salad and you're like, I want the side salad, and you eat everything else. But sometimes you just really want a salad. And when you get that salad, you're like, oh my God, this is like the best thing I've ever had. And that is your body talking to you, right? And so we have to trust that. It's hard to do because we've been taught not to, but your kids are more in tune with that than you are. So as uncomfortable as it makes you, as much as you're worried that they're probably only going to ever eat French fries and chicken tenders for the rest of their life, you have to trust that their taste buds will evolve, that their needs will change, right? Because kids have different needs growing with food than adults do. They're going through different things hormonally, physically, emotionally, all of it. And so their hunger needs are going to change. You didn't grow up loving all this stuff either. And now there's a really good chance you struggle around how much of everything you should eat. And that's because we weren't given the ability to trust ourselves. Yeah. It's not because we can't do it. It's because we don't trust ourselves to do it. And so kind of sitting back and biting your tongue as your kids eat something that you're like, I don't want them eating that. That's okay. That's okay. So, I think.
So Debbie, so you've got a PDF, haven't you?
I do. I have a list of common phrases that parents, myself included, have heard themselves say. And it's sort of a way to look and reassess and say, oh, what is the message I'm actually conveying here to my kids, right? Again, if you won't say the word fat, even though you don't want to say the word fat, the message conveyed is fat is so bad, we can't even say it, right? We'll say all the words around it, but fat. So here are some ways that you can sort of rethink some of the language that you're using. Would you like me to go through? Should I sort of
go through some of them? Through them? Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember my mom saying this. I remember coming home and crying that I was fat. I just really want to be really clear. I was never, not that anybody can see me, but in retrospect, I realize I was never fat. I've been in a thin privileged body my entire life.
Yeah.
And I have to recognize that it's a thin privileged body. It's not, I call it thin privilege because being in a thin body doesn't mean I'm better than people in a fat body. It means that the world is much nicer to me than it is to people in a fat body. We, again, culturally discriminate against people in fat bodies. So, but that being said, your kid, whether they are fat or just think they're fat, someone at some point is going to say, oh, I'm fat. And I remember my mom saying, you're not fat, you're beautiful. And as much as I appreciate what she was trying to say, which is you're beautiful, what she really said was, no, if you were fat, you wouldn't be beautiful, and you are beautiful. So don't worry, you're not fat. And again, it just sort of reinforced this fear that, oh, well, if she thinks I'm pretty now, I better not gain any weight.
Yes.
That is bad.
Yes.
So again, if your kids come crying and they say that they're fat, I would not try and convince them otherwise, honestly. Even if they're thin, I think thin people who think they're fat, they kind of need to sit in that feeling for a little while. So instead of saying you're not fat, you're this, I would encourage you to say, I'm sorry, you're sad, and you're beautiful, right? Both can be true. You can be fat and be beautiful. And let's let them know that there's space for both. This one I definitely caught myself doing. See, the last one my mom did to me, this one I have totally caught myself doing because my kids are little and sometimes they don't eat anything. And then sometimes they eat like the entire world. And I have said, why are you so hungry today? And this can really, I've had to correct myself because this can really make my kids question their hunger, right? I, as an adult, feel the need to justify anything I want to eat. But again, kids are better at this than we are. So they don't really feel the need to justify. They just know they want food and they have it. So we want to not teach them to justify, right? And we can have those thoughts. I've definitely had those thoughts where I'm like, my kids are eating so much, they're totally going through a growth spurt. And then sure enough, like a week later, they're an inch taller. Cool. But they don't need to justify that because at some point there's going to be a day when they're not going through a growth spurt and it's still okay that they eat. Yeah. So again, we want to just create the space to have that natural intuition, that we're born with. Another one is when a kid says, oh, she's so pretty, or they're so pretty, or I want to look like that. And we say, you'll look like that one day, just wait. And I remember that's especially in that like teen to tween years.
I remember my mother saying that to me.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Kate, looking at you and I look nothing alike, and we are both thin women, right? We're both thin women, in thin privileged bodies, and we look nothing alike. And there's very little I could do to look like you. And there's very little you could do to look like me. And so this idea that if you just wait, it will happen really sets us up for failure. It also doesn't really take into account the fact that we don't get a choice in what body type we have, right? So it again reinforces that if you're fat, it's your fault. And the truth is, we don't get a choice. Again, that's why I call it thin privilege, because I didn't do anything to earn this body. This is the way my body comes right now as a 42-year-old woman. It came in a different size and shape when I was in my 20s. And I'm going to guess that by the time I'm in my 60s, it will be a little bit different as well. Maybe not that different, but things will hang lower or point in opposite directions or something.
Sagging going on.
So, definitely. But again, just sort of leaving the space for that, because there's a total possibility, if they're looking at someone with curves, there's totally a possibility that they'll be curvy, but there's also totally a possibility that they won't. And we, again, don't want them to feel like they're doing something wrong if they don't have the body that they want, right? Because we think of all the time as adults that we've tried to sort of change the bodies that we've had. This is when I just like to sort of say, I've had this said to me so many times, that's not very flattering on you. that is code word for you look fat in that. And that once again implies fat is bad. So we don't have to find an outfit flattering on someone for someone to feel comfortable in it. So if they say, what do you think of this? Just give a supportive answer, which is not, you don't look very flattering. It'd just be like, you look great. You look comfortable, right? These are things that doesn't have to be about, oh, it makes your waist look so thin, or, ooh, I love like what it does to your shoulders or anything like that. It can just be about, you look really comfortable in that. You look really happy, right? And again, different people want to highlight different body parts. And also, fat bodies can't hide that they're fat bodies. There's no outfit that a fat body is going to put on that makes them look like me.
Yes.
So let's sort of step away from the idea that they should be finding those outfits that transform what they look like, because those don't exist. And again, all sort of the underlying implication that fat is bad. And that's why I say you got to use the word fat everywhere, just to get used to it and get used to the fact that it's not bad. Speaking of which, another thing, this is when my daughter has come home from school saying her friends, she came home from school and she said, so-and-so's mom said that food like fill in the blank makes you fat. In her case, it was pizza. And we gotta trust ourselves in that. Here's the thing. And this is where we have to unlearn some of this, right? This is where we have to correct ourselves, is because food doesn't make people fat. Bodies come in different shapes and sizes. I think pizza is one of those foods that is very commonly associated with bad foods. So I think it's a great example, because I know lots of thin people who eat pizza, and I know lots of fat people who eat pizza, and the pizza is not the reason the fat people are fat, and the amount of pizza is not the reason the thin people are thin. Again, we don't get a say in the type of body that we have. So we want to, again, encourage our kids to listen to their hunger levels. If you're throwing out things like, oh, that makes you fat, or, oh, that does this, or, oh, that does that, it's gonna, when they get that inclination to eat something, it's gonna make them doubt and question, is this okay? Am I okay? If I'm doing this, am I being bad? And that's where the guilt and shame sort of comes from. So again, we can't prevent our kids from having days where they don't feel ideal in their body, but we want to give them the space to know that feeling bad, again, doesn't mean they are bad, right? And so all of this language is sort of helping to facilitate a space in which they're allowed to feel bad and still be totally okay.
Yes.
So
that's great. So so we will add a link to this.
Yes, there's a few more that I have still caught myself saying. So please check it out. No shame if you hear yourself saying any of these things. Again, it totally makes sense that you're saying these things.
Absolutely. And it's just being aware. Okay, let me just rethink that. Okay. How can I rephrase that?
Yeah. And again, making it part of, mommy's still learning this, right? Mommy's not perfect. Mommy's still learning it. You might end up better at this than mommy is. And I hope you are, because I wasn't taught to do this very well, but I want to teach you to do it better. And giving them the space to have, more freedom with their feelings. Yeah.
And so Debbie said, tell us how we can find you. What is your website address? We'll put all the links below anyway.
Yes, my website is bodyrelationship.com, bodyrelationship.com. Like I said, I do one-on-one coaching and I do group coaching. I've been starting to work with teens and tweens. The truth is that I think kids start this language much, much earlier. But feel free to reach out. I always respond if you send me a message. You can also find me on Instagram at at body relationship _coach. I'm very active on there. I do weekly meal supports with another eating disorder survivor where we get together and we eat and talk about how complicated it is to eat and feel good about yourself. So we do all sorts of stuff. But you can find me at bodyrelationship.com. And like I said, we're going to link this parent guide because not some of the stuff I went over is there, but then there's also quite a bit more of things that you might be saying that we can rephrase and say in a more supportive way. Because it's out there. The messaging is out there.
Yeah. Oh, Debbie, thank you. Thank you so much for this valuable, practical, important information for parents.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope that, the future generation has more space to have all the feelings. I want them to feel good, but I don't want feeling bad to break them the way it breaks so many of us. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, Debbie, thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you, Kate.
Thank you. So that's all for today's episode of Bulimia Sucks. So thank you to everybody for listening. And before we go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, whether that's Apple, iTunes, or Castbox, or Buzzsprout, or Spotify, wherever it may be. Make sure that you subscribe, and what would be fantastic is if you could leave a review. So thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you in the next episode.